So we'll start from here. Let me introduce you first the panelists. And then, if you agree, we'll continue the discussion in English, if it's okay. So please welcome Ms. Lala Panait, who is an urban anthropologist, cultural manager, and community facilitator. She has an area of expertise in democratization of the public space through artistic interventions. Also welcome Mr. Marko Aksentievich, who has a political science background, and his activity focuses on the management of public resources and the engagement of citizens towards them, more or less, okay? And the star to be Istvan Sokach, multimedia artist, curator, cultural producer, and activist. He's advocating for socially engaged art and active citizenship. Thank you for coming from Barcelona and joining us. Okay, we'll start with Istvan, who has a presentation about artistic disruption in public space, if I understand better.
Yes. All right, so I will have this start up 5 minutes in English, because this is what we agreed, but later, as I see, everybody is Romanian, so we can switch it to Romanian. As almost all of you know, I'm Istvan. We drank beer together, so it's not a novelty. I'm from the Altar Foundation, that's been around for 20 years, and today I would like to attack a little bit this theme of urban resilience. Okay, so there are 6 slides. This is the first. So resilience is about how you recover from the hardcore challenges that are upon us, like global warming, etc. But it so happens that we are usually taking the external challenges, like global warming, like global capitalism, like whatnot. We are forgetting about the internal challenges. And when we look at the internal challenges, we will see that the administration, the entrepreneurs, and the citizens define differently all these challenges, what kind of challenges they are facing. The administration wants more political power. The entrepreneurs want more influence, so they get more money. The citizens living in Grigorescu want more quiet. The guys from Florești want some roads. The guys from Pătărât want some houses, yes? So actually, when you are trying to identify the solutions, they are per se, by default, contradictory and create conflict. Now let's talk about this internal conflict in the city, which is unavoidable. So we should forget that paradigm in which we are a city, we are a community, and we are together to find a solution. No, actually we have internal conflicts, really serious internal conflicts among administration, business, citizens, all kinds of citizens. And I didn't mention other social actors. Okay. Now, if we look at the state as it is embodied in the administration, as we know the famous definition, they have the monopoly on violence. So we are talking about a violent relationship, yes, towards the city, and we talk about state oppression. Now, this brings the problem of the conflict that citizens are having with the administration, etc., is asymmetric. The state usually has the power. The money actually has the power. So it's an asymmetric conflict. And there are lots of theoretical and practical frameworks to deal with it. 2 of them are insurrectional politics. This is the more academic one. And the other is military strategy. That's been around for pretty long. And there we are talking about insurrection strategy and counter-insurrection strategy. I learned a lot from these in the last years, and all my activities incorporate Maoist, Leninist, Chapaist, and so on, insurrectional strategies, and this is the first time that I ever mentioned this in public, so you have to know. Okay, so usually we are shying away of talking about conflict because there is a ruling ontologic hegemony, to speak it nicely, that you're supposed to be nice, Christian, emphasize the positive values, not talk about conflict, it's not fashionable, it's not okay. Actually, it's part of your life. And there are theoretical framework to talk about this. Good. And just to speak of some, the Invisible Committee has some cool texts about it, Derrida has some cool texts about it, how you subvert power, how you invert power, how you stay between these two. And actually, a lot of military strategists speak about this in really sympathetic words, starting with Sun Tzu, of course, which is unavoidable. Okay, now if we look at one of these theories, the asymmetric conflict theory, it says that there is the, which one should I press for the laser? This one. So whenever the strong meets the weak, usually it's a good chance that the strong wins. But sometimes the weak also win. Now what happens is that usually there are direct versus indirect approaches of conflict. There are two things you can do about a conflict. Either you annihilate the other's power to fight, or you annihilate the other's willingness to fight. Yes, Sun Tzu typically emphasizes that you don't need to annihilate the other's army. You need to annihilate his willingness to fight. You need to beat the strategy of the other guy with your strategy. It's not about muscle against muscle. Yes? Good. So, it is this problem of capacity versus will. And you have direct ways of annihilating capacity, indirect ways of annihilating capacity, direct ways of annihilating will, and indirect ways of annihilating will. Yes? These are four types of different types which are manifesting in asymmetric conflict. Which asymmetric conflict is typically you versus the administration, or you versus capital. Good. Now you will see that whenever in indirect conflict, it is a good way, and guerrillas did it a lot of times, to not match direct approach with direct approach, direct offense versus direct defense. When you have an opponent that comes to you with direct offense, you will do indirect defense. And when you do, you attack directly, so again, it's always the opposite approach, yes? And this is the typical guerrilla approach that's been running around, documented in like the last 100 years. Okay, and you see this is a good one. Percentage of asymmetric conflict victories by type of actor. So this is the other one, usually the powerful guys win. But when you see the percentage of how they won, in history, in the last, since 1800 up until almost now, the ratio of asymmetric conflict in which the weak used opposing strategies, their chances of winning a conflict increased. And this is what's happening in the city today, that you are in an asymmetric conflict with capital, with the state, and you have choices. Either you meet their direct attack with direct defense, you will probably lose, or you meet their direct offense with indirect defense, then you have higher and higher chances to win, and so on. And we can discuss about some of the stuff I participated in, like the fight for Parcul Feroviarilor, Someșul nostru or Musai Musai. You all from Cluj, so you all know these cases. And there is only one thing that I want to show you. In 2011, you don't see it because it's too much light, I kidnapped the statue of Santa Claus. And there was a penal case. I almost went to prison and for qualified theft. And when the detectives told me that, okay, so this is qualified theft and you will go to prison, I said, okay, no problem, but you have to know this is an art project, and everything that we do will be part of an artistic project that for 5 years will be exhibited in all Europe. What was my point? That their direct offense I couldn't match with direct defense because they were right. I actually stole it, but I actually was indirectly undermining their willingness to fight because they understood in this thing that for 5 years I will ridicule them and it's not worth it. So they gave up. Yes, this was just one of the cases, but we can discuss about more. So that's it. My final point is, we are in an asymmetric conflict situation. There is a lot of literature to how to address it. Statistically, it is proven that the opposite approach is working. Let's do it.
What I understand from István's presentation is that resilience is a battle of brains, yes, of creative protests against traditional authorities' ways of dealing with conflict.
Yes.
How do you think about it? How do you relate to authorities in Belgrade?
In the Sun Tzu manner as well. Our favorite Sun Tzu quote is, "It's better to be uphill than downhill when fighting." And I mean, basically, like it reflects in our strategy in terms that, if we are looking for some space that should be used for cultural or social center, we would rather occupy it first and then even investigate whose it is, but like develop the negotiation strategies. As I had a lengthy presentation of what we do earlier today, and then I said that, like, you know, Serbian administration is even more slow than it's corrupt, and in that sense, like, you know, this is, getting into the, like, you know, putting them under the certain issue, like they will either give up because it doesn't pay off, or would have to actually confront it in one way or another. It works very well, for instance, when you are defending evictions, like, you know, you put them into the position where they have to answer, like, you know, why are they now, like, you know, making somebody homeless. Or when you are confronting certain urban development, which is something that we do a lot. So, for instance, the whole this system of urban planning is made in a way so they can say that citizens participated. And, like, you know, we have a long track record of groups that we helped in one phase or another of this, like, trying to contest the certain urban plan. And the only times it succeeded was when groups were willing to go outside of the institutional way of filing complaints and doing things like that. But, like, go into the like, you know, the chamber for the forest and, like, you know, block it until, like, you know, they get a resolution they want. And it's really, I mean, like, you know, the system is set up in the way that, like, you know, even in this chamber, the people who are working are like supportive of the people causes, but they need somebody to disrupt the system in order to make the professional decisions they would do otherwise. So in that sense, I would underline this notion that it's more important to talk about resilient communities than the cities. This, like, resilient cities is this the concept that, as Ishtan said, like, you know, is made to prepare us for, like, the worst is coming. And, like, you know, we saw, like, you know, the last year in California where there were, like, fire forests, like, what, like Kenya West, like, you know, paid fire workers to defend their mansion. I mean, that's who is, like, the most resilient to the like, you know, the nature disasters, the one who has the money. And in that sense, like, this whole notion that, like, you know, your city should be resilient so to attract new workforces or it dies. Well, other cities die off because, like, people are going where it's more sexy. So we should denounce the idea that, like, you know, institutions should look into resilient strategies, like they should solve the problems that make people do massive migrations or, like, the climate change and things, and then rather emphasize this notion of resilient communities that, like, you know, fight the institutions in order to make them working more for their well-being.
And how do the authorities relate to you in all cases?
Well, not too favorable, but I mean, that's not the, I mean, like, you know, we are not in that business. I mean, like, sometimes we cooperate, but, like, you know, most of the times it's contested, and, like, for the reason, because, I mean, like, they like to exchange the flattery words, but that doesn't do any, I mean, like, we, like, in Belgrade, like, we went a bit too far, maybe, with some stuff. So it took us a while to now return the status of a potential partner with the city authorities. But I mean, that is because the city authorities are so unwilling to cooperate with citizens. In that sense, like, you know, we shouldn't waste too much time trying to fix the government in this notion that, like, you know, institutions should change by themselves and then, like, everything else will follow, but rather work on like, you know, creating communities that can bring up the change that we want to see the institutions. Because institutions should, you know, like, the solidarity should be institutionalized. Like, resilience is only a strategy.
I'd like to ask Lala now. She works on specific issues here in Cluj. Please.
I was also thinking how authorities benefit from the resilient citizens in general, or how authorities benefited, at least until 10 years ago, of not so much active citizenship in Cluj, I think. And when we started our initiative, La Terenuri, the project in the biggest neighborhood of Cluj, I think we were also underestimating ourselves somehow and our capacity and the neighborhood, and also the authorities underestimated our work until it became an issue on the local agenda and they couldn't avoid it because we pressured them so much, 7 years, to transform an abandoned area into a place, a park for the community, that they couldn't say no. And also I was thinking now when you were speaking that this Monday we had the biggest debate in the Commission for Urbanism here in Cluj in the town hall regarding our project. So we consider it as a historical day for us when finally the authorities are really doing this park in which they don't even name it a park, they name it a sports area, but still we have to negotiate it. And we were happy somehow to notice so many elements that we proposed these years presented in the project, like the amphitheater for cultural events, so many elements that we tested, and also we used a lot of urban tactics, as also Istvan mentioned. So somehow we tested to show that some things work, something not. But we were in the moment also in the town hall, we were looking at each other, the people from the neighborhood, and we were like thinking they didn't credit us almost for nothing in the town hall for all these elements that now they think it's a good idea to implement them. And in the end it didn't matter for us because we convinced them indirectly that elements of the park and the park itself, it's very useful for the community. But now who takes the credit?
From your part.
I was thinking, I also end up in a moment in which I accept also some actions of the town hall, and we also learned that during our initiative these years, another actor was really working to propose a blocks development area, and we didn't know. So one activist project on the way and one very private pressure. So somehow we didn't know so many years that the private was building symbolically and will build blocks on the former gardens next to our area. But in the same time, some elements you lose in this battlefield somehow. And also learning how to let go of some things in your battlefields and also focusing on others. And many times I think I saw the town hall keeping us busy in some areas of the city and then letting the real estate developers doing the real job in the city. And we were happy that we are being somehow free, that we can experiment in the public space, we can do our interventions in the public space, but in the same time, another part of the city was being ruined or demolished. So I'm not sure what is resilience anymore.
This is a question from a journalist who is outside of your world, let's say. How do you choose the conflict that's worth fighting for? I mean, most of the beneficiaries of these actions don't know about the thing until they've seen it done.
Yes. Well, what you can never deny is your own agency. You cannot say that, oh, I discovered the problem and let's help those people. No, actually you have an interest. You have some ideas, you have some ideals, you have methods, ways, ends, means to do it. And it would be total hypocrisy to deny it. And one example would be Parcul Feroviarilor. You know that Pascani got the park and he wanted to build a sport establishment, whatever. We started to protest and I went around the houses in the park to ask people, so there is the neoliberal demon coming and he wants to construct a sports field. And the people were saying, oh, hell, excellent, very good. And so I said, no, you know, he wants to destroy the park and make a sports and hotel and football. Yeah, excellent. So I was totally a minority discourse, but in the end we could escalate enough public momentum that it became a real resistance. And so, sometimes it is just, so it's always your agency that gets inspired and that energy you filter through yourself, you take in account or not the public voice, because if I was taking into account the Parcul Feroviarilor people there, today it would be a football field of Pascani there. But I didn't. Other times it's just sheer luck. For example, you know this friendship march between Romanians and Hungarians? I started it. And in the end, it turned out, I just saw some official statistic, it reached more than 4 million people in Romania, that news. And it started just from a Facebook post that I said, oh, interesting, let's make a march. So it's sometimes just dumb luck. Yes, and sometimes it's just 5 years of work. No.
Well, we have two criteria, I would say. One is if there is a community around a particular issue. So like if there is already people who gathered around a certain city development, or there is a group of people which wants to occupy a space, or there is a group of people which wants to, like, fight for the bike lanes or like whatever it might be. Then we know that, like, we have to put much less of our own resources in order for this fight to become visible and prominent. And other things are those fights that we see have a potential of changing a narrative. And I can name like two campaigns that we started, really putting our thoughts into how do we best articulate what we want to do. And one is in regards to the Belgrade cinemas, which were closed in 2006 and privatized. The guy who privatized them ended up in the jail because of some tax evasion. And we realized that these empty cinema halls, which everybody has a super sentimental associations, and that ended up in the convicted criminal case, are actually the best case for us to make of what has happened with the cultural venues, what is what kind of city are we getting with this kind of policy. The people could sense the loss and the brutality of these spaces being removed for some unsuccessful speculation. And it really ended up in after we entered the cinema, that the National Parliament Chamber for Culture was discussing renationalization of the cinema. It's the first time this word is appearing after the 20 years. So which is also absurd that it reached these heights. But these are kind of we, some campaigns we prepare thoroughly. Such is also a campaign against the Belgrade waterfront, because it already this is a megalomaniac project that government was promoting all around Serbia, and we realized this is also giving us a spotlight to advocate for the right to the city and the right of every citizen of the country to have a say. Is this really a project that we want to put the public money? So I would say that, yeah, ideally it's the combination of two. I mean, and obviously, the fight is the ones that we find is for the public cause.
Okay, I forgot to mention this is an interactive session, so please intervene whenever you feel comfortable. You have a question?
I was thinking as Lala was telling this story, and I'm somehow emotionally related to it also, so I understand that we need this positive part of it, in which we kind of recognize that, okay, this long time work is finally recognized in a way, but it's not recognized in fact. We sacrifice our self-recognition in a way, or the people who work there, as you were saying, Lala, that, okay, I agree that they don't give us credits, but at least they are doing what we proposed. And that's nice thing that it's happening, but it's a very bad thing for the community of activists or for the people who are struggling for these things, because that's a bad practice. It's a very bad practice when people are working and are putting their ideas and their creativity and their time and their life on this kind of projects. And in the end, everything they have and somehow it's established along the time that you have to be somehow satisfied with this less. To say, okay, whatever, they don't mention me, they don't mention our project, but at least they are not destroying it, you know, because we are so attached to this kind of projects. But that's a very bad thing for the future, I think, and for the people who could maybe be interested or would like to do some kind of this work. It's not...
But in the same time, if we compare, okay, we are all the time critical here in Cluj, but if we compare our city with another one, like, for example, Bucharest, my Bucharest colleagues are always saying, like, be okay with what you obtain now, because you are, I even told to our mayor, we are doing this in a pioneer way, and he was, okay, the word pioneer, wow, yes, the first, the biggest skate, the biggest, okay, but in the same time we convince them indirectly to do this, compared to other cities that don't even let you get in the town hall building. I mean, I like to think more positively lately, otherwise you go nuts. After so many years and burnouts and so on, you have to somehow stay in a floating line in a way. Otherwise, yeah, I have people that are quitting this job, right? Because it's not for everybody, and all these nights and projects and reports and all this work. In the end, yeah, you see a result that you wanted. It's not about us in the end. It's also about the future of the city and the green space that will, I don't know, will be useful also for the next 20 years, 30 years, for the kids that maybe won't remember who we were. So somehow I also like to think in this optimistic way.
It's nice.
It's survival, not resilience.
Yes, that's not resilience, that's survival.
Is these actions you're taking increasing participation from public? Do you feel, I don't know, a change in public pressure against authorities, or a more open attitude towards...
Okay, so generally, Altart is a cultural foundation. The default stance of a cultural foundation is that you obey, you play nice, you emphasize the positive, you get a little money and you make the most of it, and the mayor comes to the opening, takes a nice selfie and posts it on his Facebook and gets 1,000 likes. That's the standard, if you want, choreography. Okay. When you step up contesting the decisions, the strategies, the ways decisions are taken, then you step up as a political actor, and then you get the heat. Then you are in conflict, and that's it. What I am advocating for is that the independent cultural scene needs to make this step, to acknowledge its presence in a conflictual political situation, scene, context, in which you have to negotiate every day for your life. That's it. And
is it hard to do this when authorities keep the money, they have the resources?
Yes, but not only they have the money. And now everything we do, some go to hell, some never get recognition, acknowledgement, nothing, it disappears. It's not by mistake that the mayor never says your name. Because by saying your name, he would legitimize you as a political subject, as an actor. And he doesn't want you to enter the political arena as an actor. Yeah, some girls from the neighborhood, yeah, the gang, yeah, the guys. Doesn't name you, doesn't institute you as a political actor. It's not by mistake. It's a totally conscious thing. Yes. Okay, and but every now and then we manage to become visible as results, as ways of working, as methodologies. And meetings like this could become, if done more regularly, more whatever, possibilities for spreading the word that yes, you can develop a different type of presence, political presence as a cultural association in the city. That's it.
So, I mean, we managed to get to the state where authorities name us, but not allowing us to claim a victory. So like, even when like we succeed in bringing about like something that like we rallied around for a long time, like we will never get credited for, like, it's always done in the way that like, you don't have this like, satisfaction of saying like, people like we did it. And it's really like a super smart strategy of the authorities, like, this like making you like feel impotent and constantly, and like making your struggle like looks like really like, these like Don Quixote things, and like, for people to join, like it really demands a certain like crazy energy, like to be willing to fight these like lunatic fights. In that sense, like, what have worked better for this like mobilization of people has been these like creating these like autonomous spaces where people can then like gather, and it also gives like certain material feedback to people that like, like we come around like a fire around ancient time, and now around like a modern dance show, whatever, but there is like this sense of like, that like, we made something, and like I wasn't aware of like, its importance before like we entered this like long campaign that like, brought us like only scars and like surveillance and like, whatnot. And like, although like, people would tell you that like, you've done a lot, like you don't see any of it. And like, you like, even like, when you change an institution, like, it's like, especially in the Balkans, it's not guaranteed, it will not reverse to the worst, like very next second. So in that sense, like, one should have a balance between like, creating like really like some things that like, you can return to as a shelter, and like, not be deprived of by the authorities, and then on other days struggle harshly and hope that you will gather enough lunatics to join.
Istvan spoke earlier about the menaces within the city who affect the resilience of a community. Could you name a few of these menaces?
Back to your thing that, just a second, that you need to create your shelter. Please read insurrectional theory. This thing that he's talking about in insurrectional theory is called the sanctuary. That's the place where you can always return, where things get shitty. And then you also need popular support, so you can expand, you can network, etc. It's really useful. Now, what was the question?
About the menaces of...
of course. Well, actually, this is a double grinder. It's a triple grinder. First, the state grinds you all the time and wants you to obey the official way of speaking. Probably the whole Facebook was full lately that how capital hijacked mindfulness. Well, it's not news. Capital hijacked innovation, capital hijacked culture, capital hijacked urban whatnot. Anything is hijacked. And what you can do is just be a step ahead of it and invent new concepts that you can hold on until they hijack that one too. And then you move on to create new concepts again. So this is one menace. Political power will hijack. Capital will also hijack whatever you got. That is the second grinder. Yes. And in this sense, what I was mentioning earlier, it's not always that you have to beg for money from the city administration. No. Actually, there is a lot of money in capital, and that is also a dog-eat-dog world in which they are competing among each other with the state. And you can easily go to one capitalist and say, do you want to look better than the other capitalist? Hell yeah. And the third grinder is your actual colleagues, your civil society, who will criticize you for whatever and be the most surprising sneak attack from behind. When you think that your people is solidarity with you, then they will fuck you from behind. It's a classical situation. So actually you're always in the triple grinder.
It's the battle for resources.
Yes.
And speaking of this, I was thinking also before you mentioned, we always reinvent ourselves also through methods in the city. Some methods, in my case, in our case, were more hard. Some were more soft. Now I'm working on a research for a method using tours in the city, but they're not innocent tours. Mm-hmm. I will show areas in which also capitalism is pushing lakes and parks and so on. But somehow it's a way of walking and understanding the city and discussing with people outside our bubble, which for me is very useful.
It's Live the
constantly.
City tour,
Yes,
yeah?
the tours, yes. And the tours, in my case, were a moment of reflection and self-reflection a lot, with my personal reason for starting things in the city. And I put on a paper why I started, because I miss staying in the countryside on barefoot. I miss green spaces. I miss also, I'm preparing now a childhood tour of Cluj. Because, yeah, in my city where I grew up in Bucharest, I wasn't free when I was little, because between the blocks, my parents didn't let me so much free. So now in the city, I love exploring, and from exploration, I started initiatives in this neighborhood. So somehow, also, if we look in ourselves, why we do this, we can reinvent also ways of resisting in the city or moving forward.
How about in case of Belgrade? What would be the next challenges, I don't know, towards its resilience?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, really, as we were, well, I mean, like, I don't know if, like, I mean, I'm in peculiar situation now because I'm in such a deep need of sanctuary. So, I mean, my personal development probably is a bit different from the Belgrade zone. But thinking of, like, how do we go about change now, like, having experience a bit of even like a local political life, I'm like, and like you understand why this resilient city concept has been brought to the city level, because, like, local communities are the forefront of, like, whatever is happening. But, like, we must like denounce the idea that, like, it should face the consequences. But we should look into, like, what our local communities can contribute to, like, changing how the things function. And, like, the thing that I am mostly occupied nowadays as something that should be kick-started in the smaller communities is this comeback of democracy by lot. Like it's like a lotocracy. I don't know what would be the. I'm encouraged by Istvan's coming out as a Maoist to like first time publicly argue for this thing. But I really think that I mean that like this like liberal democracy like needs a serious like representative democracy needs like to be remade seriously. And that should start from the very local levels. The biggest, like recently I found out that the German community in Belgium is already experiencing, I mean, it's only like 70,000 of people living there, but that is something that I and we look upon in terms of like, where do we go next? And like, I really think that like we should change the modes of fighting and change the things, because like this is I started talking about like having like one cycles of campaign. I can already tell how like the system will let you take your part of the power like only once you become competent. Like you're not competent in a good way, but like you become harmless. And I think like these things needs to be like disrupted systematically. So that would be my coming out for this panel.
Thank you. Any questions? Maybe?
Just a soft addition.
Please.
Just a soft addition to this one. There is even a concept for that, and in Cluj we can see it almost happening. It will happen soon. It's called non-state actor generating governance. Yeah, so actually there are more and more communities stepping up where the state fails to produce governance and they are producing governance. Now this is the next shit. With experimenting with micro political communities. I'm not saying it's democracies. It's not always democracy. Sometimes it's just a boss who says what to do. In Patar typically there is a non-state actor the families, the clans, the local mafias that are generating governance, that they are policing, they are distributing resources, they are creating education, childcare, whatnot. It's a non-state actor de facto generating governance. And this will happen in Cluj, in many places. The first place, my prediction for today, is Florești, where it will happen, in the ghetto of the IT people. Okay.
You got the discussion in a very interesting place. I'm interested if this number of increasing non-state of actors who generate governance, it means that the state is too corrupt, it fails, a failing state that due to corruption.
You need to read a little bit of Agamben. Yes, it's the bare life concept. The state withdraws with the services, and the only thing it generates is policing. Like the Black Mask people go to Patarot and beat everybody, and then they withdraw, and that's it. And then they regenerate their governance again. But this will happen. In many places, the state fails, de facto fails. And then that's where the squatters move in, the local redistribution of resources move in, and everything. Yes.
I have a final question about the, I don't know the English word, bugetarea participativă. Budgeting, yeah, participative budgeting. I want to understand if it's a symptom of this kind of concept, resilient city, if we addressed it, or it's only PR for...
I mean, when I hear about this, let's say concept, because the reality of it didn't exist, it was a failure in Cluj.
Okay.
And Cluj, it's like this, in this way, but in many ways, I discussed also with my colleagues today, that Cluj is seen such a sexy bubble that we see the inside every day of this city, and this sexiness we don't understand anymore. And this is also for the budget of participative budgeting. And also many people from our other cities called us to ask us how you did it. We heard that your mayor did this in the city. He didn't do anything from my point of view. He just stole our time and also, and our energies, just in the name of a good image for the city and good intentions for the city. But how many processes we had in Cluj? Three, but anyway. So.
Well, I mean, I would say that, like, as a concept, it is something that is worthwhile. I mean, like, it really does create, like, conceptually a venue, like, for people to think about, like, what are the priorities for the community, and if, like, authorities are good, like, they would know to listen and, like, see what, like, how people are thinking, and, like, expand beyond these, like, small portions of budget that they usually devote to these kind of things. But, like, obviously in our reality, like, it becomes everything but the deliberative forums. Like in Belgrade, like in my municipality, like, they had this like project where they basically, like, put up the internet poll where they ask for, like, what should the municipality fund, and they put out, like, the 3 services that they already had. So, like, it was basically like participatory austerity measures. Like, you were, like, basically, like, are you for kids to get computers, or, like, for the this, like, the kid woman taking care of the elderly, and, like, it's really, like, bizarre. Like, I don't want to take part in this. Like, who do we cut and loose now? But then again, like, the city of Shabat had quite a success. Like, they actually put all, like, so they divided by the villages, and they put, like, all the tax, all the money on property tax from that village into the pot where, like, people are deciding on, like, what they want to invest. And I mean, like, some invest into new infrastructure, like, that they put lights that are like, on the road that's approaching the village. Others are, like, building churches. My favorite is, like, in one village they're making, like, this, like, football balloon, like, that, like, besides all the fields that they have, they want to make, like, a balloon. Is it balloon? Like, when they cover the. So they are putting, but anyway, I mean, like and the point is that like there was increase of 300% of the taxes on property being paid in these villages. So I mean, like it really gives like people like some sense of like meaningfulness of this. Of these kind of processes. So I mean, like with everything else, like it's really about like how it's being done. But I really think it's a good tool for like people to practice the like this like dialogue on like what are our priorities, like what we want to become, and etc.
A short question also for us. What do we do when the power confiscate our idea of culture for the city, idea of participative budget, idea of participation? Because in our city, many times, I mean, 15 years ago, culture was differently, or independent culture was differently. The authorities understood that through culture, they can win more power, more capital, and more image. And then many times I felt abused or confiscated from taking my intention for the city, and they using it in a perverse way. And then you don't recognize yourself in that thing that they took it and developing it just in their own interest, like this participative budget, because we were really good intention when we worked, when we thought we have a chance to work together with the authorities. But after that, they took us the process and they did what they wanted, and without, again, no, it wasn't about recognition, but also like, what about these ideas that they just take it and ride the wave?
Okay. 1 year ago, I co-edited European Manifesto for Social Innovation and for innovation. And what we realized as we were writing, it was two guys writing it, that the word innovation is so much coded in the Silicon Valley definition that Europe will never be able to catch up. So what we did, we changed the definition. Actually, we hijacked the world, or tried to re-hijack the world, so that to try to change the rules by which this word is used in sentences, so that we tilt it, we bias it. So we also use the same word, but with a different definition, from which we get out good and not America. So this is, if you want, this is a word play. It's a game that you invent concepts, you lure these people like the mayor or capital, and there will be lots of opportunities to create fancy words that, oh, it's so interesting, let's hijack it, and they actually take it as a bait and go at least 1 meter in your direction. And yes, this is what you can do. But you had a question. If you want to add something, or if not.
Yeah. So it's not that question. It's really not that important, but let's say it. I just want to introduce a small distinction, because when you say that the state was withdrawing from the social services and stuff like that, I think those are actually two processes. First was when the state actually did withdraw from social housing, healthcare, and stuff like that, which we are basically living now, the consequences of. But there was also another withdrawing from the state in the sense that the parliaments failed, and voting for the European Parliament, I think, is actually a symptom of that. So why was it important? Because we were trying to bring back what was actually, in my view, already lost, like 10 years ago. So I think these are two processes. And how does that relate to us? I think it actually made us more vulnerable to capital, basically. And because what we are doing most of the time is, I think, putting out fire while standing on a tank of gasoline, to use like an image, because I think all of these alternatives are mostly focused on the distributive side of politics. And what Marco said, actually, being able to choose like participative austerity. What are we not to have? I mean, how fucking low is that? So, I mean, this is also the Serbian state that is doing it. But anyway, I think that it's important to just remind ourselves that when you mention innovation, it comes from the monopolies who actually do have to innovate. So it's not capital hijacking it, but it has to, innovate, be more competitive so that it can have more accumulation. But these are shitloads of money. I mean, these are huge amounts of money that you have to invest, for example, if you want to develop artificial intelligence, if you want to develop a new production process of cars, iPhones and everything, I'm just giving random examples, but still, when you compare what are we fighting for with regards to them, it's like, I sometimes get the feel that these individual activisms are basically very, very humble, in their demands. So I have nothing to say new, basically, but I just wanted to say that until activists stumble upon, and I think they will stumble upon this productive side of capital, changes will not come. So if we stick to the distributive side, it's gonna be okay for a while, but it's not gonna solve anything. So that's my doomsday message for today.
Okay, if there are any more questions, if not, do you have a final statement, something that has to be said, and then we close the discussion?
Two things, even. One, the independent cultural sector stop being sheep. There are tools, instruments, books, concept, strategies. It is possible. You don't have to play all the time nice, all the time just beg for the money. And come on, as I said, you bend your head, they will not cut your head, but then you will start to graze. That is one of the things. The second, imagine this, that after we had so many historical models of mayor, yes, of the strongest guy with the biggest club, the guy who has the best yard, best kept yard, and the fattest sheep, the guy who is the best industrialist and is the tycoon and becomes, and so on. Now the next step would be the facilitator mayor. But the problem is that this facilitator mayor figure would be somebody who actually lets these governances, these non-state actors do shit, regenerate governance in a sense, and he would facilitate, but that is totally contradictory to the ways power is preserved. So he needs to prove power, but in the new setup he cannot prove power, and I think that in the next maybe 10, 15 years, this will really bring a crisis of governance on this city, and not only, but on this city surely. Okay, that's it.
Very short. I don't know. I'm not too much in this direction, and in the last year I had also moments and talking with a lot of people around me that there are times in which we can take a break also from this and understand what we did. I mean, in this time I am in the reflection and not doing so many things. It's also in a way doing, but in the same time we don't have to invent, create non-stop projects just to have activity in the city and to spend money. And this I'm also disturbed by a lot of NGOs from Cluj that I consider the money machine lately. And in the same time, it's a good opportunity to just sit with yourself and understand where are you in the city, where is the city going, and then maybe regroup on the battlefield, and then think how to act and also where to shift to other people or other actors that can maybe have more potential than you thought. So non-action and more silence sometimes maybe it's good also in our cities.
Well, yeah, I don't have much to add, but like if there is something that we underline, it is to strategize more. Like I really, like for us, like the important thing that we learn throughout all these years is that, like, you know, that we sit in the room and then like are like actually like thinking of like how the authorities, because they are mostly on the other side, but like whoever might be on the other side would respond to like different scenarios that we can bring about. So it's really like, you know, there is like, you know, in our line of work, like in this ideal term, there is this tendency to do it like justly, and like, you know, that you go, but you go with dignity, and like, you know you will fail, but there is a dignity to your failure. And I mean, I know it's going to sound cheesy, but like life is short to be on the losing side all the time. I mean, it's inevitable. So in that sense, like it's really, I will agree, like more pragmatism and more harsh approach is what not only independent cultural scene, but all of our communities lack.
Okay, thank you for your presence. I learned a lot. Thank you, everybody.